It took you 20 years to save your first $1 million. The second million takes about 7. It's the same person, earning a normal paycheck, doing the exact same thing every month. Nothing about the effort changed. The money simply started moving at a completely different speed in the back half. Here's the part that quietly messes with people. You hit $1 million on the way to a goal of 2, and you naturally assume you're halfway there. Half the money is sitting in the account, so surely about half the time is still ahead of you. You are not halfway. In time, you're closer to 3/4 the way done. The first million is the long, slow, grinding part. The second million shows up while you're barely paying attention. Halftime is a lie. By the time the scoreboard reads 1 million, you are already deep into the fourth quarter. I'm Tom. This channel is about real personal finance for normal people. The kind that actually works, instead of the kind that sells you a thumbnail and a $49 course. No motivational fluff, no fantasy returns, just what the math actually does over time. If you want real wealth growth, hit subscribe. Today I'm going to show you why 1 million turns into 2 faster than almost anyone expects, why your own brain gets the timing so badly wrong, and what all of it means for you even if you're nowhere near a million yet. Let's start with why your brain misreads this so badly, because the mistake is baked right into how we think. Our heads measure distance, not time. 1 million out of 2 million looks like a job that is 50% finished. The progress bar is halfway across the screen, so we assume the clock must be halfway too. But money and time are not the same ruler. At these numbers, they pull apart hard. Picture a bathtub. You're filling it the slow way with a bucket. Every month you walk over and pour 1 bucket in. That bucket is your savings, the money from your paycheck. For a long, long time, the bucket is the only thing raising the water level. You pour, you wait, you pour again. The water barely moves. That stretches your first 100,000, then your first few 100,000. It's slow, it's manual, and it's all you. But this particular tub has a strange faucet built into it. The faucet opens wider the higher the water gets. When there's barely any water in there, the faucet is a thin little trickle. As the level climbs, that trickle thickens into a real stream. By the time the tub is getting full, the faucet is gushing, pouring in far more water than your 1 bucket ever could. The water you already have is what controls how far the faucet opens. That faucet is compounding. The bucket is your paycheck. And the whole secret to this video is what happens in the moment the faucet finally beats the bucket. Now let's put real numbers on the tub. Say you invest $1,500 a month. That's $18,000 a year going into a plain index fund that tracks the broad US stock market. Over the last 30 years, that market has averaged about 10.3% a year, including dividends. Go all the way back to 1928 and it lands right around 10.2% a year per NYU Stern's long-run dataset. Nobody can promise that going forward, but it's the honest, long-run figure. To keep the math clean, I'll round it to 10%. Let me walk you through what the bucket years actually look like, because the numbers tell the story better than any pep talk. After 5 years of that $1,500 a month, you have personally poured in $90,000, and your balance is about $110,000. The market chipped in around $20,000. Nice, but quiet. After 10 years, you've poured in $180,000, and the balance sits near $287,000. The market has now added $107,000 on its own, with no effort from you. Jump to 15 years in. You poured $270,000 and you're sitting around $570,000. With the market's share already past $300,000, notice the pattern hiding in those numbers. Your part climbs in a straight, boring line because you add the same $18,000 every single year. The market's part is curving up underneath you, faster and faster, because it's a percentage of a balance that keeps getting bigger. Early on, that curve is so flat, it looks like a flat line. That's the trap. You judge the whole journey by the part where the curve looks dead. By year 20, the year you finally cross $1 million, here's the quiet thing that already happened without any fanfare. You personally contributed $360,000 across those 2 decades. The market added $670,000. The market already put in nearly twice what you did, and you almost certainly never noticed the exact moment it pulled ahead. That is the faucet beating the bucket. It happened years before you reached the million. You just couldn't feel it while it was happening. Here's another way to feel that shift. in your first 10 years, your own money makes up about 2/3 of the balance. You really are the engine in that stretch, and you can feel it because the engine is small and the road is uphill. By the time you reach 2 million, your own deposits are only about a fifth of what's in the account. The market is the other 4/5. You started this thing as the engine, pushing it forward with every paycheck. You end it as a passenger, watching the market drive. Nothing about your effort actually changed. The math just quietly moved the work off your back and onto the bigger pile of money. Now watch what the second million does. Going from 1 million to 2 million, putting in the exact same 1,500 a month, takes about 7 years. Read those two numbers next to each other. 20 years for the first million, 7 years for the second. It's the same paycheck and the same monthly deposit, just sitting at a different point on the curve. The only thing that changed is that the faucet finally opened all the way up. Add it all together, and the picture gets even sharper. 20 years to the first million, about 7 to the second, so roughly 27 years total to reach $2 million. Which means the moment you crossed 1 million, you had already used up about 3/4 of the entire journey in time. You felt like you were standing at halftime. You were actually 3/4 done. The second million is closer than the first one ever felt, and it is not even close. The reason is almost embarrassingly simple once you see it. On a small balance, the market's help is tiny. 10% of $10,000 is $1,000. That won't change your week, let alone your life, so it feels like nothing is happening, and you're right, almost nothing is. Watch how that market paycheck grows as the balance does. On $10,000, it adds about $1,000 a year. On 100,000, 10,000. By a $250,000, it's 25,000 a year. By $500,000, it's 50,000. And by $1 million, it's a full 100,000. Reach 2 million, and an average year quietly hands you $200,000. Sit with that 100,000 for a second. That is more than 5 years of your 1,500 a month deposits, all showing up in a single year while you're asleep. The percentage never changed. The dollars exploded because they're riding on a base that keeps getting bigger. At some point along this climb, the market becomes the highest earner in your entire household, and it never asks for a raise, never calls in sick, and never takes a day off. I have to be straight with you about two things here because this channel does not do fantasy returns. First, the market does not hand you 10% on a neat schedule. In 2022, it fell about 18%. In 2024, it rose about 25%. That long-run average only shows up for the people who sit through the ugly years without flinching and selling at the bottom. Second, these are nominal dollars I'm describing. $2 million 27 years from now will not buy what 2 million buys today, because inflation quietly eats a few percent every year. In inflation-adjusted terms, the doubling is slower, closer to 10 years than 7. The acceleration is completely real either way. I just won't pretend the number on your screen is worth more than it actually is. Quick thing before the next part. I genuinely want to know where you are on this curve. Drop a number in the comments, just the rough ballpark of where your invested total sits today. 10,000, 200,000, a million, whatever it honestly is. I read them, and seeing where people actually stand is half the reason I make these videos. Alright, back to it. Let me show you someone who lived this exact curve, because his real numbers make the whole thing concrete. His name is Greg. He's 55, and he turned off his alarm back in March and hasn't set it since. For 31 years, he worked as a mechanical engineer at a mid-sized manufacturer in Columbus, Ohio. And then one ordinary Tuesday, he simply stopped going in. These days, he doesn't add a single dollar to his investments. He takes money out instead, about $72,000 a year, to pay for his life. And his portfolio is still growing. That's the part Greg can't get over. For 3 decades, he fed that account every single month and it crawled. Now he feeds it nothing. He drains it, and it climbs faster than it ever did back when he was working. He looked at the balance at his kitchen table a few weeks ago and said the exact thing almost everyone says. When this finally clicks, this makes no sense. It makes perfect sense. It just runs backwards from how we expect money to behave. Here's his curve. At 45, Greg had about $700,000 invested. Solid, not spectacular. The result of locking his spending back in his 30s and routing every raise straight into the market instead of into a bigger house. He crossed 1 million around age 49. By 55, the year he walked away from the job, he was sitting near 1.9 million. His first million was the work of most of an entire career. The leap from 1 million to nearly 2 took him about 6 years. Same boring index funds the whole time, same engineer's salary, no windfall, no inheritance, no lottery ticket. In that last decade, his portfolio went from 700,000 to 1.9 million, more than doubling, while a salary did nothing of the sort. Here is the cleanest way to see who actually did the work. Of Greg's 1.9 million, his own paychecks put in roughly 1.1 million across more than 30 years of saving. The other 800,000, which is almost half of everything he owns, the market built for him while he was at his desk solving someone else's engineering problem. He didn't earn that 800,000 with his hands. He owned it into existence, and now the backwards part? Greg adds nothing to the account anymore, and he pulls out 72,000 a year to live on. His drain is wide open, but at 1.9 million, that faucet is pouring in far more than 72,000 in a normal year, so the tub keeps filling anyway. Even spending what he spends, his money crosses 2 million within a year or two of him quitting, and then it just keeps climbing. That is why people who are genuinely ready to retire so often watch their net worth go up after they stop working, not down. Their faucet finally got bigger than their drain. So why doesn't everyone get to stick around and watch this happen? Because most people quit right before the good part starts. Think about exactly where the boredom peaks. It's that long middle stretch, the years between a couple 100,000 and a million. When the faucet is open but not yet gushing, your deposits feel small against the size of the goal. The market's help is real, but it isn't dramatic yet. Nothing feels like it's truly working, and that is precisely the stretch where people give up. Some stop contributing and let the account go stale. Others cash it all out for a kitchen remodel or a nicer truck. One scary market year spooks plenty of them into dumping everything to cash at the worst possible moment. They walk off the field at the end of the third quarter, a cycle or two before the score would have run away in their favor. The cruel joke is that the slow part is not a sign your plan is broken. The slow part is the plan. It's the price of admission to the fast part that comes after it. The people who reach 2 million are not smarter than the people who stall out at 300,000. They were simply still in their seats when the faucet finally opened. There's a calmer side to this too, and it's worth a quick mention. Once you've watched the faucet take over even a little, you stop panicking about every bad headline. You learn that a down year is just the faucet sputtering for a moment, not the tub draining out. That calm is its own kind of advantage. The investor who doesn't flinch in 2022 is the one still holding everything when the rebound shows up in 2024. Staying calm and staying invested are really the same skill, and that skill is what actually carries you from 1 million to 2. Here's what all of this means for you wherever you happen to be sitting right now. If you've got 200,000 invested and it feels painfully slow, you are not behind and you are not doing anything wrong. You're still in a slow fill stage, pouring buckets into a tub that barely seems to show it. That's supposed to feel slow. You're building up the base of water that opens the faucet later on. And if you're starting this later than you'd like, in your 50s, watching the clock with a knot in your stomach, here's the part that should land. You do not have to fill the whole tub by hand. You need to get enough water in to crack the faucet open. And from there, time and the market do a share of the lifting you've been trying to do entirely with your own 2 arms. The base is the hard part, and the base is also the part you may be closer to than the slow feeling lets you believe. Plenty of people sitting on 300,000 or 400,000 in their 50s are nearer the faucet than the panic in their head suggests. So the move at every stage is the same, and it's gloriously boring. Automate the deposit so it leaves your account before you can talk yourself out of it. Pick a broad, low-cost index fund and then leave it completely alone. After that, ignore the flat-looking early years. Because the flatness is a lie your eyes tell you while the faucet quietly widens out of sight. The single most expensive thing you can do is stare at a slow first few years and decide the whole machine is broken. It isn't broken, it just backloads everything good. The framing you usually see is some version the tub filling up below the faucet line, and the faucet pays you back for all of them at once. But the real mistake is reading that early slope as the whole story. You look at 5 years of small, unimpressive gains and you assume the next 30 years will look exactly the same. They will not. The line does not climb in a straight diagonal, it curves, and the curve only gets steeper the longer you stay in. That steepening is the entire game. So if you're pouring buckets right now and quietly wondering whether any of it is worth it, here's the honest answer. The first million will test your patience far more than it tests your math. But once that million is in, you stop being the main engine of your own wealth, and the market takes over the heavy lifting. 1 million does not mean you're halfway. It means you've filled the tub right up to the line where the faucet takes over. And the second million is already much closer than the first one ever felt. I built my own freedom on an ordinary salary, pouring that same boring bucket for years while the water level barely seemed to move. I know exactly how slow the slow part feels because I almost talked myself out of it more than once. The only reason I keep making these is that the slow part is where people quit. And quitting is the one guaranteed way to lose this particular game. Stay in your seat, keep pouring the bucket. The faucet opens for everyone patient enough to wait for it. I'm Tom, and I'll see you in the next one.